If we don't step up our game in Europe, there's a high chance that it's too late and Europe becomes this kind of museum, which is beautiful and people like to visit and go to in the summer.
Filip Dames, co-founder of Cherry Ventures. Filip is on a mission to fund Europe's first trillion-dollar company. He co-founded Zalando and led it to a $6.7 billion IPO. Now he's building Cherry Ventures and raised a $500 million fund to support European winners.
We need to normalize failure and celebrate ambition.
What are ways that we can actually implement it?
How do you train ambition? What could this company become? What would be the article, the future press release 5 years down the line that you want to read about yourself? Why don't we build the fund that we would have liked to have by our sides? And that became sort of the first Cherry portfolio. Skip the theory, dive into the practice and start building.
Ladies and gentlemen, by way of introduction.
Filip, when I dive deeper into your story, I notice that you are, at least in my mind, you are a rare combination of things that usually don't appear in the same place. So outside of entrepreneurship and before you started your first startup, what experience, context, or value from early in your life had a strong impact on you that still affects what you're doing today?
Yes, I did not grow up in a family that was in any way involved in tech. I always thought I was going to become a musician. So I had classical training in violin and then also in singing. So at some point thought about becoming an opera singer. So that creativity and on the one hand, but on the other hand, also the discipline of having to work on it every day, on knowing that unless you put in the hours, you're going to get a good result. I think that's definitely something that influenced me. I think the creative thinking is helpful when we talk about startups and investments, because we need to think about, if all the stars align, if everything goes right, what could that company become? And often you need a bit of a creative thought process for that. And I think the discipline helps it as well, because we also want to be the hardest working VC firm in the market. And we know that we can't just sit here and wait for the best companies to come to us, but we need to lean forward and we need to put in the work as well. So I think two principles that are very, very helpful for me today. And I think the second part is I grew up in a very big family. Yeah, so my mom and dad had 5 kids. Then my father in his first marriage had another 2. So I had to start negotiating pretty early. And I think that helps as well today.
And one concept that I'm always very fascinated by is the idea of cross-pollination, where basically ideas from different fields exchange and blend at some point. And you mentioned you were on track to become a classical musician. Tell us more about this chapter, like what pulled you towards opera singing, and also like how did it then eventually cross-pollinate like other stages of your life?
Yeah, I think I firmly believe you cannot just be one thing. And you see, some of the best minds in the world, they started in one field and ended up in a completely different field. And I think it also adds perspective. I think perspective is so important in today's world. We talk about efficiency and AI and automation, but what actually matters is creativity and creative thinking. And I think therefore you can really benefit from, not being too single-minded, too focused on one topic.
Quick one. 8 months ago, I had no idea what venture capital was, but I thought it sounded cool. But I also noticed that this industry is very gate-kept. So I started this podcast for one simple reason: to make venture capital and entrepreneurship more accessible. Now, I want to take the show to the next level and share the most personal and actionable conversations. Could I ask you for just one favor? If you ever got value out of any of these conversations, could I ask you to subscribe to the channel right now? This 2-second action helps the show more than you can imagine. It means I can bring on bigger guests and have more impactful conversations. Thank you.
It's a story. When I was training a lot, I had a small surgery on my vocal cord because I had a cyst, because I was singing too much and then I was spraying cortisol on it. So exactly the stuff that you shouldn't do. And that sort of made me think, okay, wow, so I'm here relying my career on these like 2 few centimeter strings that are in your neck, in the back of your neck. And And I was actually also always someone that was interested in a lot of things. Now, my parents are both doctors, so for the longest time, I thought I was going to become a doctor. Then I had this music thing going on, and then I was super interested in business and entrepreneurship. So I was never sort of set out to be this one thing or have this one career. And in a way, that's also a bit why I love VC so much, because you get to spend time on different topics. You get to spend time with different people. Now, I had this go in the tunnel, heads down phase in my life when we were building Zalando. And that was definitely an intense phase as well. It was also really, really good for me to go deep for a couple of years, the startup before as well that I had. But in a way, I love the fact that you can take ideas and concepts from different areas and combine them for what you're doing at that particular time.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you say that, because I moved from architecture to like venture
Yeah.
capital or entrepreneurship, and I was so surprised that I noticed that I felt or feel still that entrepreneurship is actually more creative than architecture, because of all the decisions you have to make. Like, you always need to be creative about every single step of the process. And in architecture, I noticed that in the end, it ends up being a service provision very, very often as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I
And
mean, as an architect, you need to be creative, you need to be service-minded. You have to bring in your own ideas by not forgetting your customers. I know this because we're building a house at the moment, and sometimes I wonder, is this our idea or the architect's idea? And then, in a way, you learn how to run a professional firm as well, and that's all things you need.
And what was the underlying motivation for you to then become an entrepreneur, or to start your first business?
So when I finished school, we had sort of three camps, I say. There was the first camp that went into consulting. I had done that. I done a few months in consulting just to try it out. It wasn't for me. I didn't like the fact of working for a presentation and not for a thing, not being able to build. The other went into banking, and then maybe there was a few that also went into kind of industry jobs, and then there were the startup people. And back then it was very few. We had first couple of successful, quote unquote, successful examples in the Berlin ecosystem. You had StudiVZ. I don't know if you remember that company. It was started or co-founded by one of my alumni, and so it was this new thing, mostly going on in Berlin, and I was intrigued by it, and I liked the fact to go and build and just try things out. And I was like ready for that and wanted to become my own boss. And I loved that idea. And then I met a few people that were ex eBay. And I pitched them this idea of a marketplace for art and collectibles. It's something I was really passionate about. I still am. I still love art, and it's an important part of my life. And there we developed this idea of doing a live auction marketplace for this particular category, with the hypothesis, yeah, eBay has gone super mass market, and we have these, you know, chargers for mobile phones and like ugly products. So bring back the authenticity and the soul in a way to the platform, something that others have tried, like Katawiki or also Sotheby's, Christie's, and these companies. But it was hard. Yeah, it was a tough learning for me. It was definitely Tamundo, so that's the name of the first company. Was definitely a failure. We didn't get the flywheel going. We had a passion for the product, and a lot of our users were really, really passionate. But we had super low frequency. We had very fragmented supply. And there's nothing compounding about this business, because you always had to scale supply side and demand side in parallel. And I think we realized that pretty quickly, like I would say a year and a half in.
Okay.
We had scaled the company a little bit. I think we were like maybe 30 people in the peak, but we realized it's not enough. There's not enough pull for this to become a meaningful business. And yeah, I mean, obviously this was super disappointing, and we had basically worked nonstop for a year and a half in order to get this thing going. But it was an important learning for me as well. So I think also as a founder, talked about failure in the beginning, but I think you learn both ways.
And I think the most important thing is also that it didn't hold you back to like continue your entrepreneurial journey, because after Tamundo you joined a small fashion startup at the time that became Europe's largest fashion marketplace, Zalando. And I'm curious, if I would have been a fly on the wall in the rooms where you had your first team meetings, what would I have seen in terms of the team's ambition? Did you already say that we want to build a massive company, or did your ambition grow over time?
No, I would love to say we started out saying, let's IPO this and this is going to be the biggest thing yet. We didn't. We definitely had something going on for us. So when I met Robert and David, who had just started, and they were like, "Hey, come join us. Be a late co-founder. Like we're both introverts. We need an extrovert." This kind of conversation that we had, and I was like, "Hey, I love the idea." And by the way, to your question, there was no way for me going back into a regular job. I had totally caught the bug of being a founder and being an entrepreneur. I loved it. I loved going to the office and, writing specifications, talking to the engineers, and then turning ideas into a product, seeing users use it, and being able to understand and define these things for us, whether successful or not. I said it at the beginning, it was not that successful, but for me, it was no way I would sort of go back and become employed somewhere. So that sort of ship had sailed. And then for me, it was like, I really, obviously we knew each other from school, and I thought the idea was really interesting. And Zalando obviously had a much, much bigger TAM. That's the first thing. So I think also as a founder, if you think about sort of where do I want to build, you want to pick either a market that's sizable enough. So if you have a small market share, you can already have a big business. It's much, much easier to own a small share of a very large market than a big market share in a very small market. Or you want a market where you think, and maybe you're unique in thinking that, which is, sometimes even the biggest companies, that the market will be growing very fast. Yeah? And at Zalando, you kind of had both. You had, good repeat purchase behavior. We actually built a proper execution machine and scaled the company, but also Zalando, to be fair. Yeah, I mean, IPO was 2014, so the 7 years before, there were lots of ups and downs, right? There were so many moments when we thought, okay, we're running out of money, or we have to close the business. So also an important reminder that, even if the story looks really, really great at the end, or looks great from afar, there's lots of ups and downs. And starting a company is always a roller coaster, and it's never a straight line up and the right. And that was also the case for Zalando, where now you would look at this company and be like, okay, we're in the DAX, and it's this massive business.
I came across a quote the other day that I wanted to ask you about. It's from Brad Jacobs, and it goes, "Success lies not in the elimination of problems, but rather in the art of creative, profitable problem solving." And he goes on and says, "Problems are an asset, not something to avoid, but something to run towards." And I was curious, how did you deal with this when you were moving so fast with Zalando?
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's the same about like what's the most important about the startup. It's very rarely it's the idea. It's most important what you make out of it. So if you start a company, test it out, right? Don't just write a business plan and think this is gonna go well because I have such a good idea. Talk to customers, validate, iterate, and I think if you face problems, it just forces you to do that faster.
Yeah.
I think having a problem-solving mindset as a founder is absolutely key, because you also need to be creative around problem solving. Right? So, and I think also there's a muscle that you can learn in dealing with problems, and I see that today now, also having done venture for almost a decade. It's not that you get more relaxed about the problem. It's you still have the same paranoia. Okay, I need to solve this. I need to solve this, but it can be done. So there's a certain confidence that you acquire, I think, over time where you're like, okay, this is just a problem. So let's break it down. How can we solve it? What are the elements of it? Which one can we solve today? Which one can't we solve? And sometimes also, where do we have to just accept that we simply won't be able to solve it now? And then it's also important as a founder to say like, okay, let's not spend more time and let's deprioritize. It's sort of a known unknown. We keep going and we'll encounter the problem later down the line and maybe we can solve it then.
Yeah. And what was the hardest part of this journey, building and scaling Zalando, that also helps you now empathize with founders today?
I think we there were a couple of challenges, and I was in Zalando. I took over the product team, so we had to innovate a lot on the product experience. In the beginning, Zalando was this first mover, right? Then others caught up. We had lots of competition. Fundraising has always been a challenge. If you look at the cap table of Zalando, it's not the super shiny names always that invested. Obviously, everyone that invested made a lot of money, but you had to have conviction that this could be done because this hadn't been done before in Europe. And I think one of the key challenges also I thought, and also looking back and seeing the company today, who's still there, who has left, I think one area where we really had to excel, and that's probably true for all startups, it was hiring. Yeah, so the people that we brought in the beginning, when we were still sort of forming the DNA of the company, played a huge role for the success of the business. And I think it continues to be the way today. It's just that the hiring becomes it becomes different, right, as the company and the organization grows. In the beginning, you talk to everyone. I think you try and keep that for as long as possible, so you really know who's joining, who's performing, who's not performing. And over time, you need to develop a system. You need to create an organization where you, as a founder, can get leverage from other people. And but at the same time, it's still as critical as in the beginning, right? So if you have a team and there's one bad person in the team, the whole team can flip. Yeah, and it's kind of this one foul apple rottens the entire basket, right? So to keep that balance between, on the one hand, hiring really like world-class people, taking time to make hiring decisions, then also being fast at assessing and analyzing, do these people perform not only individually but also in the entire construct of the organization. So also firing fast, which is an important character trait that's sometimes not that easy as a founder. Yeah, and then balancing that with the pressure that you have from, oh, we raised X amount of money, we need to scale. If we're not X people at the end of the year, like our board said, terrible advice, by the way, then it's sometimes hard to always have the bar very, very high. And that's something that you need to be, you just cannot compromise on as a founder.
And then in 2014, after Zalando's IPO, you left, like you changed from running a startup to sitting across the table as an investor. Why?
So it was not something we had planned as it sometimes go. At Zalando, I was always the person for like the new business stuff as well. So I started a company called Zalando Lounge, which is also today a few billion in sales and successful business in sort of the off-price world, and also new categories, new countries. I brought the company to 17 markets in Europe when we were expanding. So I was always the kind of person that was interested in building and creating either new business or new markets. And that's also why I was always interested in what other people were building. And quite organically, we got approached by founders that were pitching us their ideas, initially asking for help, asking for advice. How did you do that? How did you set up your customer service? Like, how do you manage your product teams? Like these kind of questions that you can learn from people who've done it before. And that organically led into the first angel investments. We at some point before the IPO, we were able to sell a little bit of our shares in a secondary, so we had a little bit of money, and then started investing. And one thing that I think we did then which I think was cool and was the reason why Cherry exists today. Like Christian and I, we realized how different we are in assessing things and how complementary in a way also our skills and our characters are. And we felt like putting this together makes a lot of sense because we have different eyes on the same thing, different opinions, and that's also why we started doing it together. So the first Cherry Fund is really a small angel fund. It's our own money, and then later down the line we asked a few friends if they wanted to invest with us. So they gave us a little bit of more of their money, and we had a bit more to invest. And that became sort of the first Cherry portfolio. I think it was 24 companies, and investments in terms of size, they range from as little as 100,000, 200, sometimes even less. So it was really, really small. So we started small. And then in the meantime, when I had decided for myself, look, Zalando was an incredible experience that I'm also incredibly thankful for because I learned so much and also met so many of my closest friends during that time. Because I think the intensity of it brings people together. But for me, it was clear after the IPO, I need something new. The company had, grown to a size where, you would come into the office, you log into SAP, and it definitely was a different vibe than when we were starting out. And I think that's natural. But for me, it was like, okay, I think I need to start a new chapter. I was quite sure about that. And I had a couple of ideas, like in the healthcare space, we were quite far with one idea. But then we kept coming back to this investing, and we actually really enjoyed it because it was less of okay, we have to now build this. It was more of like, how can we enable others to perform at their maximum? And that sort of led us to the idea of like, why doesn't this become our next company? Why don't we build the fund that we would have liked to have by our sides as operators? So really like a founders first. I know many say that, but an organization that has the founder really at its core, and try and just work with the most ambitious people out there and help them create the next Zalandos and the next billion-dollar companies, hopefully.
I'm curious to get more into the value proposition of Cherry. And I have this hypothesis that around like 20 or more years ago, there were mainly two things that VCs could provide, which is knowledge and money. And I feel like with the democratization of knowledge, like through the internet, but especially now with AI, nearly all information are publicly accessible. Um, so there's only money left. But then I think with all the competition that is going on in the VC space, money as a value proposition is dead. So I'm curious, what is it that sets Cherry apart?
We try and be the most founder-focused firm in the world. We try and be the hardest working firm in the world. We try and think about how can we maximize the chances of success for our founders. And we have sort of set up a couple of things internally where we think this could be helpful. Like it starts with the investment team, let's be honest, because those are the ones that interact with the founders the most. And everyone on that team has been a former operator. So whether they had started their own companies or have worked inside fast scaling businesses, everyone has operator experience. And I think that's important, particularly at the early stage, because we want people that are able to relate to the journey that our founders go through. And then we have sort of created this team in the back, which we call the strategic resources. And there are people that help you hire, help you with go-to-market, help you with communications, with go-to-market. A lot of funds have that, and we try and keep that team relatively small, but very experienced and senior. But it's something that our portfolio really likes, particularly on the tenant side as well. You can make so much of a difference if you can complement the founding team or can bring sort of the first 3-4 critical hires to a company, and they're really a match and they're really a fit. I think that adds incredible value. So the other thing that I think is important, and there's a few funds in the US that do this well, very few actually, I think in Europe, is about go-to-market. So we really try and pre-map for any given company. We try and pre-map design partners. We try and make introductions wherever possible, particularly in the beginning when it's about like, let's, explore a collaboration. Let's explore building a product together. So in a way, we see Cherry less than a firm that provides capital, but more like an operating system. So you join Cherry as a founder. We know it's hard. We know not everyone makes it, but we want to sort of build the platform or the operating system for you to rely on, so you can focus on building, and that's a bit the idea. And we try and make that very, very concrete as we work together. So with most of our teams, we're on WhatsApp almost on a daily basis. We we work quite closely with the teams if they want to. Yeah, so it's not something that we push upon them.
And what are the topics that founders usually struggle with the most, that you can also then provide most support with?
Yeah, so I think first of all, talent is key. Yeah, so close the first critical hire. How do you do sourcing? How do you do outreach? And how do you really get the best people to join? I think this is something where we can help. Then obviously on the commercialization side, so warm intros to lighthouse customers, understanding how to run a structured discovery pilot, logo motion with conversion reviews and these kind of things. So it's on the commercial side. And then we often work with teams during fundraising. That's a critical moment. It's not only about who's going to invest how much, but it's also about crafting the story. So what's the narrative? How do you phrase the equity story in the context of the current market? Right now, that's, for example, super important because the market is so concentrated and almost binary on things AI and things that are non-AI. So we work on stuff like that, and in a way, it's also us being a sounding board, kind of like a resource to tap into when you need it.
Dear founders, is Europe ready for its first trillion-dollar company, and are you ready to build it? The current narrative around European tech is all doom and gloom. Europe is failing, venture is tough, the US is way ahead, and Europe isn't the place for builders. We don't buy it. Yes, the next decade will look meaningfully different from the last. Everything is up for the grabs as the world transitions to new technologies and advancement in AI. We need to act boldly and defy conventional expectations. There was just the beginning of a letter that you published earlier this year with the announcement of the Fund 5, which is like a huge $500 million fund. What made you write this letter, and why now?
So I think this can be Europe's decade. It sort of has to be Europe's decade. And for that to be true, we have to stop playing defense and start playing offense. And in a way, Europe has all the ingredients, right? So Europe has the most engineers in the world. We have the talent. We have the top tier research institution. We have the industrial customers. So there's a lot of things that are there, but then there's a couple of things that are missing. Yeah, and we need to just work hard to overcome the barriers that are preventing founders to swing big at the moment. Yeah, so that's why we wrote this letter. We wanted to make a deliberate statement, and we all know, $1 trillion is a very, very big number. But the message that we wanted to send is like, it can be done. We need to do it with everything that's going on in the world. Europe has a responsibility. European founders need to raise the bar. VCs too, by the way, because I think it doesn't. The founders are getting better. Also, the VCs need to get better. And we don't lack the talent. Sometimes we lack the permission to swing big in Europe, and that's what we wanted to change with the letter.
And I think one topic that always comes up in this discussion is also the discussion that European founders are not ambitious enough. What do you think needs to happen to spark a cultural shift in Europe's approach to innovation, but also to ambition? Because what I'm asking basically is, how do you grow Europeans' ambition? Or do you think it's even necessary?
Yeah, so I mean, let me start by saying a lot of European founders are incredibly ambitious. And I think we've seen fantastic examples of that in the European ecosystem. Also lately, if you look at teams like Proxima Fusion or Exploration Company in our portfolio, also teams like, Lovable and Mistral. So founders that actually really have a global mindset and are ambitious enough to truly believe and back it up to win on a global scale. Yeah, so that's definitely, it's there. We just need more of it. Yeah. And I think the first thing is that what we need to do is we need to normalize failure and celebrate ambition. And that's something that I think culturally in Europe is lacking a little bit. If you look at the newspaper here in Germany, it's often talking about, okay, who has failed, who had the startup that went bust. And it's very rarely celebrating actually incredible achievements that are happening in the ecosystem. So we don't need cheerleaders, but we need people that, also help celebrate ambition. There's this whole area of bureaucracy in Europe that we need to fight. It starts with stock options for founders that need to be more employee friendly. So founders are able to incentivize their employees in a way that is tax efficient, something that we've been working on in Europe. It starts with institutions like EU Inc., right? That is calling for a joint entity that can be started online. We have the notary system in Germany. So that's part of the equation as well. But I wouldn't go so far to say it's an excuse. I think it's maybe a small kind of bump in the road that we have to overcome. But as Europe, we need to understand what's important. And if you look at the US right now, if you look at China right now, it's also clear, like if we don't step off our game in Europe, there's a high chance that it's too late and Europe becomes this kind of museum, which is beautiful and people like to visit and go to in the summer, but not a place where innovation is created and companies are built. And I think this is why we're here at the end of the day. This is why we are doing this job and why we're excited about, really building the next generation of category defining companies in Europe. Is because we think the ingredients are there, the people are there, the talent is there. Now we just need to put one and one together and start building.
To improve the regulatory side of things, I can see a path forward. Let's say I think you Inc. is doing a great job in this, but then I'm wondering for the first topic that you mentioned, which is to normalize failure and to start celebrating also successes. Like, what are ways that we can actually implement it?
Yeah, so I think as a team, and I'm not saying like, okay, let's change the culture, let's change the media. That's not our job. I think if you look at yourself as a founder, how do you train ambition? Yeah, and you can train it, right? So think about like what could this company become? Like if I sometimes tell my founders when I'm in due diligence, like, what would be the article, the future press release 5 years down the line that you want to read about yourself and test that out and test the boundaries as well. Set metrics that feel uncomfortable, right? So hold yourself to very, very high standards, yeah, and surround yourself with the right people. I think that's probably the most important. Yeah. So if you think about who in Europe you can look at as a role model that have really created something remarkable, and don't be afraid of approaching these people because, and I know this because I'm speaking to a lot of them every day, whether it's Mickey from Volt or Torsten from Helsing or Ellen from Exploration Company or Jochen, the Flixbus guys, Hakan from Autoan. All of them are so motivated to help support the next generation of global companies from Europe. So they are open to give advice. They're open to connect and help and support. Some of them are investing. So I think surround yourself with very, very ambitious advisors. Yeah. People who have already done it and people who want to now help enable the next generation.
Yeah, I love that, to really make use of the ecosystem, and especially then the success stories to get the flywheel going in a way. And the letter that you drafted also pushes back against the idea that Europe is forever behind the US. And when you were on Bloomberg the other day, you spoke about Europe's potential in deep tech. Could you maybe first tell us a bit about what deep tech actually is, and then why you think Europe is exceptionally well positioned in that industry?
Yeah, so deep tech is really the let's call it the hard stuff. So oftentimes combination of software and hardware topics that are more capital intensive often also than others. They take more time, right? So I think Proxima Fusion, the investment that we did recently with Francesco and his team, I think is a very good example of that. A company that tries to build the first fusion power plant in Europe. And the outcome of that, if you think about it, if you write that press release for that particular company, you end up saying, okay, this is clean, free energy for everyone, which is like obviously one of the biggest, massive outcomes you could possibly imagine. And why is Europe good at that? So a couple of things. First of all, the research and the talent. So we have some of the best universities in the world. The research facilities are world class, and it's oftentimes only the part where research becomes a commercial idea or becomes a company that is sort of lacking and missing, and that's starting to change. Yeah? The second thing is that you have actually a lot of the customers in Europe, right? So if you look at the supply chain of these businesses, I would argue probably around 50% of it is European. Yeah, so you have actually a comparative advantage of building in Europe and starting these companies. And then I think the third one is obviously the tailwinds that we're facing right now with the government spending, with the realization of European governments that we also have to work on things around European sovereignty, whether that's in defense or whether that's in energy, and or whether that's in space, right? Space exploration. So there's a realization of European policy that these companies need to be created in Europe. So I think you're also building at a time where you will get a lot of help from institutions and potentially also non-dilutive funding that you can tap into. So I think it's a combination of these three things really, and it's one of the areas where we can still win, and that's also why we're excited about it.
And what are the main challenges in investing in deep tech? Because you mentioned it's not just another SaaS product, so it can take probably more than 10 years of R&D before you actually see revenues. And how is such an investment different?
And so it is different because it typically takes longer. Yeah. So if you look at the fund that is a closed-end fund, 10 plus 2 years usually, you need to understand where can you get in what time frame. And it's often more capital intensive. So you need to also think about early on. You may not need so much money in the beginning, but you need to think early on, like how is a business like that fundable going forward. That obviously makes it a tougher category. The reward, yeah, so the potential outcome is also much bigger. So it's kind of like a balance that you have to keep also in a fund, and we believe in it. Like we're super we're excited to invest in deep tech business. My partner Christian has just led this investment in the company called Quant in Stuttgart that's doing photonic chips, and very very exciting company. And I just came back from Paris working with a company called Robotics that's building a less than 2 millimeter small, tiny robot that does drug delivery in the brain. So it actually crawls into your brain in the optimal path without destroying tissues. So they're testing the product at the moment. Super exciting business. And I think it's so fascinating to see these founders, so fascinating to see this business. And I think it's a privilege to be able to back them. And then maybe lastly, for founders that are working on these deep tech problems, I think we like people that can break it down and can break it down into actionable and concrete targets that are not sort of 10 years out, but step by step by step. I think that's really important when building in deep tech. So we always say dream in decades, but execute in weeks. Yeah. So set yourself achievable targets and hold yourself accountable against these targets. Otherwise, you sort of get lost in these timelines. And okay, at the end, we want this big outcome, but how do we get there is often more important than realizing the potential on the other end of the tunnel.
And Philip, looking back at your unusual path, which went from opera to startups to venture capital, what is a core principle or a thought a quote or a lesson that has shaped your journey and has helped you to get where you are today?
That's a good question. I would say one of my favorite quotes is "The future belongs to the optimists," and I like it because everything that sort of, if you look at the world 10 years ago and you look at the world today, nobody would have guessed we're where we are.
Yeah.
And I think if we do the same in the next 10 years, I think it will be the same. Like people were like, oh my God, nobody could have ever imagined that.
Yeah.
And, there's some ideas that we have right now, what's happening with AI and robotics and these kind of things. But at the end of the day, we don't know. So being optimistic in a time that is changing faster than ever just helps you stay on top and helps you see the potential, helps you see the opportunity. What are there in terms of new things to build? What can we do to change the world and make it a better place? And in a way, the multidisciplinary aspect of it, the one that I've also experienced in my life, I think just helps you be a bit more creative in thinking about like what could that future be. And I think that's fun. I think it's a super fun exercise. And of course, there's doom and gloom scenarios that you mentioned, but in a way, I think we're also in the most exciting time to build. I think we have never been able to create companies at the speed that we can today. The feedback loops are shorter than ever, and I think we can also be incredibly optimistic about the future. And that's at least a decision I've made for myself, is like to not be the pessimist but be the optimist.
I think that's a great note to end it on. I love it. There's actually a similar quote which goes, "The people who think you can and the people who think you can't are usually both right," which is a very similar thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a closing tradition on this podcast, like one question that I ask all guests. If you could challenge our listeners to do one thing in the following week to get them one step closer to their goal, whether they are founders, professionals, or students, what would that be?
So maybe coming back to the topic we discussed in the beginning. So being scared of starting something or becoming a founder or creating a company, because there's so many things you don't know, and it can look quite scary. I think what's fair to say is the best founders aren't fearless. They just act before fear wins. So just double down on the execution, double down on like trying things, iterating, execution, and learning. Yeah. So I think whoever learns the fastest will win. So if you think about starting a company, like don't be theoretical in a way. Like you have these like pros and cons lists and business plans and concepts that you have. Some of them are written with AI. That's also something that we're seeing a lot, where it's like, okay, this was definitely not written by a person. But that's nothing. Start speaking to people, start interviewing customers, start acting, start executing, and I think that's the way you move forward, and that's also how you learn whether you're on the right path or on the wrong path. So skip the theory, dive into the practice, and start building.
Get down to action. Thank you so much, Philip. That was so much fun. And the people that I spoke to before this conversation, they mentioned your deep sense of care, your curiosity, and also your relentless drive. And I think we have seen all three things in this conversation, but I would also like to add one thing which really stood out to me, which is your very clear way of communication, because, yeah, it really captured me. And thank you so much for sharing your story.
Oh, this was fun. Thank you, Luis. Good luck also on your journey and the next step ahead. I know you're moving from architecture to venture, which is exciting. And this was a good conversation.
Thank you.